Hello.
Hey, Jose, what's up, man? Hold on.
Hi. Can you hear me well?
Let me do some adjustments here.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's see here. I don't know if this is looked a little better when I was trying to set it up. Can you see me okay?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yep. All right. So my name's Jose. I'm a senior at the University of New Orleans, and this is my individual research project.
Okay.
Uh, so yeah. I may as well get going. I've been an of Montreal fan for like 3 years now.
Cool.
I'm like as diehard as they come. I was like in the top 0.001% of listeners for like 2021. I
Okay.
think. Yeah, so this is really exciting for me.
Ah, cool.
So
Well,
are you from
I should have had I'm staying with Dottie these days. I could have had her on here, but
Dottie Alexander?
yeah.
Really? Wow. Um,
Um,
you,
Yeah, hold on. Let me get on the Wi-Fi here. That's what I was gonna try to do.
okay. Yeah,
Uh,
your screen froze for a second.
yeah, I know. It's like I have cheap cell phone service right now.
I see.
Let's see.
Where are you at? It
Oh
looks like a movie
gosh,
theater in there.
I am. I'm at an art house cinema here in Athens.
Ah,
Um, shit. Got to remember the Wi-Fi password. Here, I'll give you a tour. Um, so Dottie works at an art house cinema, and I sometimes work here.
uh-huh.
Um, Last year I was working here a good bit before I went back to Berlin, and so they did change. Let's see, change the. So I haven't been in here as much, and I was trying to figure out what was the best and quietest place with decent Wi-Fi that I could come to figure stuff out. Let's see here.
If a cinema's it's not a bad option if it's totally empty.
Well, I didn't know like if this was gonna be like shown or like or heard by anybody, or are you just gonna transcribe what we're talking about, or you're just making notes, or
I'm recording it right now. I'm gonna go back and like transcribe it.
okay.
Yeah. Um. So yeah, I'm gonna get started. Where are you from?
I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, my mom's side of the family is from Nashville, and I lived in this kind of small part of Nashville called Belle Meade, which is now kind of a fancy place, I think. But it was just like the early suburbs back in the day, and my my mom was really into music. She did advertising and stuff, um, and she used the same studios as all of the country music musicians used in Nashville. And she would use the same musicians and stuff for like these radio ads and stuff she would do.
Uh-huh.
And mom and my brother and my sister. I have a sister who's 4.5 years older than me, and I had a brother who was 9.5 years older than me. So that was kind of a cool thing to have as being exposed to a lot of music. I don't
Uh-huh.
know if you have like older siblings or anything like that, but
I have
I
one
mean,
older
they're
sister.
yeah. Does she have any interesting musical taste that influenced
Um,
you?
Honestly, it's kind of she likes Beyonce a lot, and that's as far as I know.
But yeah, so I grew up in Nashville and I lived there till I was 8 years old, and had a very idyllic childhood. Um, and then when I was 8 years old, I moved to Columbus, Georgia, which is kind of uh, nowheresville. It's technically a large city, but it's I always like to say it's about 25 years behind the times, you know.
Uh-huh.
And lived there for a while. Then in 8th grade, I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, and lived there during high school. And when I was in high school, I was a big geek and like big thick glasses and skinnier than I am now with bad acne. And uh, basically, I was into computers and freaking and I guess you could say hacking. It would be all considered the same thing, I guess. But kind of early days of internet, so to speak. Um, and that was kind of my lifestyle then. And then I found out about, I used to run my own computer systems where people could call in and interact on this kind of underground, um, kind of freaker hacker computer network for people all over the country. I talked to like every day. They were kind of my friends. And but there would be like no girls that would I would be in contact with, which was important to finally maybe hang out with some girls. But I found out about these what we're calling like party lines for blind people initially.
Party line?
And yeah, party lines. Well, they call them party lines. It's because they call it party line because more than one person could talk on the phone at the same
Okay.
time.
Okay.
And so it's a long story. If you want to listen, I did a podcast with a friend of mine in the last year where I kind of explain it a little bit more. But basically, through this idea of using answering machines to talk with other people, even though it was like, so the short of it is, in I think the 70s, in Philadelphia, it started, I think, the public library there. It was trying to do a thing to where blind people could socialize. And so someone figured out that they could set up an answering machine to where people could call in and say things, and then someone else would compile the messages and then put that on a tape. So where you could call the line and listen to this compiled tape on a different phone line. And then people could in that way communicate. It was almost like a bulletin board. Where I came from with computer stuff, I was running what's called a bulletin board system, BBS for short. So that was like the early days of like pre-internet.
What
And
what years were this?
so it was the same idea. Because, okay, computers, I had a Commodore 64 and I had a 300 baud modem. Text, you know, really slow and just text characters, you know. And but for blind people, you know, they couldn't see a screen, right? So this library had started this stuff for blind people to communicate and socialize in some way. And then other people kind of found out about this idea, but then it got transported to California. And then these kids in the valley in California started doing it not just for blind people, just for people to talk, just for kids to talk, teenagers and like young 20 somethings to like talk shit. And
Uh-huh.
because I was a freaker, so what freaking is, and that's with a PH. So if you want to look up what freaking is, it basically is anybody who manipulates the phone system. And so that's a like I said, you should listen to this podcast I did with my friend Johnny because I kind of do a long spiel. But it's basically exploring the phone system, which has all sorts of weird things. And nowadays, it's not maybe. I mean, there's people are definitely exploring in way different ways. I mean, the hacking and what would have been the freaking community these days is still very vibrant. But back then it was more about exploring and finding fun, weird things and getting free long distance phone calls. And so we would trade games and stuff like that as well. But there's all sorts of tricks that you could learn to listen in on other people's phone calls, or even have your own like party line where I call my friends from all over the country and we'd all talk and like call stupid things and laugh. Um, but anyway, this phone thing I was getting back to, I was like, oh, this is a cool idea, because what the kids were doing in California is that they were just talking about whatever, and they were doing like prank calls as well and compiling those, but it was kind of a way to have like your own show in a way. Like I kind of wanted to be a DJ, but it wasn't just playing music. It was like, it could be lots of things. So anyway, I started one of those myself when I was in Charlotte, or tried to. And to do that, I had to figure out, how do you do this? Like, what equipment do you need? And I learned that you needed a 4-track recorder so you can mix the different elements together. So I would have like a thing where people would leave messages, and so I would take those, compile those on, and then I have to have another track where I could like be the MC, be able to put like some music behind it, and that way you could do things. So that's why I got a 4-track. So that's the long story of me starting to play music, because I always wanted to play music, but I didn't know anybody. I was a big geek. I was too scared to even contemplate it. And so when I got the 4-track, it was really to do this party line thing. And then when I finally started to make friends, when I moved back to Columbus, Georgia, my senior year, I met people who actually played music and had an extra guitar. And I was like, well, I've got this 4-track. It's actually meant for music. Let's record, let's do stuff. So that's how I started playing music and started recording. And I couldn't play it all. I was just like making just like percussive gobbledygook. But that was the start of it. And then and then it progressed, and I started bands down in Columbus, which were no good. But we tried to write our own songs, and we played like kind of punk covers and stuff like that, like Husker Du and the Minutemen and 7 Seconds and Misfits and whatever else. And then finally I moved up to Athens to go to school up here. I basically didn't mean to drop out of high school, but I was really depressed, and my therapist said I didn't have to go to school if I didn't want to, and I was like, I'm not going back. Hated it. And but I had a cousin of mine who like helped me like get a GED and then apply to come up here to the University of Georgia, because I knew obviously like the Athens scene was, because of REM and the B-52s, a place where I knew it was like a place, if you were more liberal minded kind of kid, it was a place that you could escape to, because the South, as you know, is pretty repressive, right? And
still, when I think Athens, I kind of think like SEC country,
Oh yeah, well I see. Yeah, okay, yeah. So of course, you're in New Orleans. I don't know if you're like, so like LSU, Lafayette, or whatever. Yeah. I mean, the South is college football, and even if you're not into college football, everybody else is, and that's just, it's a part of it. Like I was kind of lucky when I was in like middle school, because I grew up from a like little kid into like puberty and stuff like that. But most of my friends who became jocks were my friends before, so they were still nice to me and kind of like didn't fuck with me. But when I moved to Charlotte, I got fucked with like nonstop, so that was like, the difficult time of my life. Everybody goes through shit, but and it's interesting with artists and people that make music or art or whatever. I mean, they probably did go through a time whether they had no friend around a lot, or I mean, Julian Coster is a prime story. You know about Julian?
Yeah, and from Neutral Milk Hotel and I think
Yeah,
Chocolate
Julian,
USA.
music tapes and Chocolate USA. You know, so Julian moved around a lot, and his mom like remarried, and his stepdad was a total asshole, and he was stuck in Florida in like some place where he didn't identify with anybody. And so, you know, he holed up in his room and had to create his own escapism, a way
Hmm.
to escape, and created his own world, um, to be able to like cope with like this asshole situation that he's just like, why the fuck am I here? This sucks. And but like many people are like that. You know, it's like tons of music. I wasn't like this, didn't happen to me, but I know there's like lots of stories of like people who like when they were like 12 years old or whatever got really sick, or they had like an accident, or something happened where like for like 2 years they're like
Hmm.
at home and can't do shit, you know, and don't have friends. And so they have to learn how to do something. So they learn how to play guitar or piano or whatever it is, or paint or whatever it is. um I think for me it was just being a geek in my me being in my own world too, trying to create something. um but that seems to be pretty common, that people, it's almost like a lot of people, they're kind of like, you know, caterpillars that have to go hide, and then they reform and they kind of blossom later on. And I had teachers and stuff. It's like, don't worry, Brian. I know it's hard now, but when you get to college, it'll be a lot better. You know.
Oh, actually, that's really true. Like in high school, I went to an all boys school, you know, and so like I had that. I also had like that girls problem you
Mm-hmm.
had, you know, and I went to like a pretty big high school. Like it was like 1,200 people, all of them boys, like super jockey, you know. And I was
Yeah.
just like this quiet, introverted kid. And I don't know, I didn't really start being myself. Like I'd say like the past 2 years, kind
Mm-hmm.
of, you know.
How old are you now?
I turned 22 this month.
Okay, cool. Yeah, but it takes a while, and you know, and then you finally realize like, man, why was I concerned about all this bullshit
Yeah.
back then? But it's really hard to like not see through it, you know, especially, yeah. I mean, and the girls are always dating older dudes anyway,
Uh-huh.
or they're dating dudes who are total assholes. And you're
Yeah.
like, I don't understand. I just don't understand, you know. But I was too nervous to even talk to girls, so I was like, that was the thing. But
So
anyway, I'll let you ask questions.
what bands were you in before Elf Power and of Montreal and Elephant Stuff?
So when I first got to the first band I ever had in Athens was called Spawn, um, which was before the comic book came out, but that was with Andrew Rieger from Elf Power.
Uh-huh.
He was in that band, and there was this guy named, we had a mutual friend named Raphael who I knew from, as we said, the meal hall, which is like the dining hall at the university. I used to with Raphael, and Raphael was a really interesting character. Is uh like like I guess I would say, I don't know how he would identify now, but like basically like by uh black Puerto Rican kid, super into Prince. I was really still in super into Prince. Um, and Raphael wanted to start a band, and then so he knew Andrew, and I vaguely knew of Andrew. I took Andrew home once from a Dinosaur Jr. show when he was pretty wasted, when he was like 18 or 19.
Hmm.
And so, you know, Athens is, or and definitely back then was still pretty small, you know. And so you kind of knew, you go to shows and the same people are there, right? So
Hmm.
you go to shows, but oh, I see that guy, I see that person, I see that person. And then so Raphael invited me to be in this band, And then so I showed up, and then Andrew was there. I didn't even know who else was going to be there, but Andrew was there. Okay, I know this guy. And then this other guy named Raphael. Oh no, sorry, Raleigh was there. And that was a funny thing because I thought I was playing bass in the band, but Raleigh thought he was playing bass in the band. So we ended up both playing bass for a little while.
Hmm.
And then finally, we got this girl named Ginger to play drums. And so I was in that band for like a year and a half. And then I started another band called Basement Saint with some other people, which technically was a more polished kind of band. So in that band, we wanted to be like Throwing Muses, but I was like really into like Gang of Four at the time.
Hmm.
So I played guitar and was really kind of trying to play like Andy Gill a bit, and we were all
So,
Throwing Muses obsessed though. They were kind of
so
like
is
our
it?
guiding light as a band. Do you know about Throwing Muses? You might not, but
I do not. But was it
yeah.
like
Anyway,
late '70s, like punk music kind of?
Throwing Muses, well, Gang of Four, late '70s
Yeah.
punk, kind of like funk punk, art punk. Um, uh, Throwing is mid '80s, mid to late '80s into the '90s. These two sisters, Kristen Hirsch and Tanya Donnelly, formed a band when they were teenagers, and Kristen Hirsch at that point, when she was like 15, 16, was just like, she's the type of girl who's like writing, just like filling up journals, and
Uh huh.
kind of like, I guess, I don't know, bipolar is not quite maybe the term these days, but like kind of like just manic kind of thing. And
Yeah.
but just this intensity to her performance and her lyrics, and their guitar playing. They both played guitar, and it was like really wild interweaving guitar parts. Um, and yeah, anyway, they were, still one of my all-time favorite bands. Their first record is the best, but I mean, they put out a lot of great records. But if you listen to the first Throwing Muses record that came out like maybe '85, it's just self-titled. There's like some really heavy songs on there, you know. Um,
Hmm.
but anyway, we were really into that band. And then I was in that band for maybe 2 years or so. Uh, and then I quit. And then I started hanging out with Andrew again. And we were just playing whatever we had been coming up with on 4-track. And the primordial Elf Power had started when Andrew was living with Raleigh, the bass player from Spawn, and this other guy named Davey Rathgaber, who
Hmm.
was always a friend in our scene, and kind of hanging out with us and stuff.
Hmm.
So the three of them lived together in an apartment, and I would go hang out with them. And Raleigh had a 4-track, and they were doing like just like stoner late night messing around 4-track stuff. And Raleigh was kind of compiling these cassette tapes of like whatever they were making. So there's like 2 Elf Power cassette tapes that is really just like Raleigh and Andrew and Davey. And Laura and Andrew had started kind of dating around that time, so she's kind of on
Hmm.
it, and other friends of ours kind of pop up on these cassettes. But I
Was
started
that the
hanging out.
Laura who dated Jeff Mangum for a
Yeah,
while as
Laura
well?
Carter.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, Laura from Elf Power. So she dated Andrew for a few years. Um, and that was kind of like the start of Elf Power becoming a band.
Hmm.
So then Andrew borrowed Raleigh's 4-track, and he had been listening to a lot of T-Rex, and he just kind of all of a sudden just wrote a bunch of really interesting songs. And he played me Temporary Arm. I don't know if you know this one song, but that was kind of like the song that we were just like, holy shit, this song fucking rules.
Hmm.
Um, and and I, at that point, I said, man, I don't know if you're going to start a band or anything. And they just kind of were fucking around at that point. I said, I'll play anything, you know. And
Uh-huh.
so that's how that was like maybe 1993, 94.
Mm-hmm.
And we at first I played drums and Laura was playing bass and Andrew was on guitar and Raleigh was on guitar. And then we kind of moved things around. Then I started playing guitar. Um, and yeah, that was kind of like the start of Elf Power. And Andrew had the first record that he, of all his demos that he had made, was the first Elf Power kind of real record.
Mm-hmm.
And he pressed like 53 copies from this guy who was like a Marxist in Austin. He bought like a Cajun record pressing plant,
Uh-huh.
and so he was advertising in the back of Maximum Rock and Roll. Maximum Rock and Roll is like this. It probably still exists. It's like kind of like a punk fanzine.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's classic. It's like anybody who's like into punk rock knows about this fanzine called Maximum Rock and Roll. So yeah, it's just all the punk bands and detailing all these different scenes. And in the back of that was like a little ad that this guy would be like, you know, you can get 50 records pressed for $200 or something. You know, you're just like, well, shit, that's a pretty good deal. And they were all kind of weird. They all had like weird dimples in them. And we had to play
Uh-huh.
each one, figure like some of them were just like shit and you just had to throw them out. But we found about 53 copies that were like not shit, and made like hand screened record covers that we made ourselves, and um, gave it to our, you know, to our friends basically. And that was, you know, the beginning. So yeah.
So when you joined Elf Power, was that before you like met most of the other Elephant Six people?
Well, not quite, because Synthetic Flying Machine had been in Athens. So a lot of the E6ers, like Will and Bill and Jeff, and even Kevin, lived in this house called 210 Sunset.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a house, a bunch of people were living there. And I knew Will through his girlfriend, Laura Hetzler. So I see Laura all the time. I would come to the university to use the art lab at the university. They had like the earliest versions of like Photoshop and scanners and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. So I was always kind of like, even when I wasn't in school, I would like go there and just kind of hang out. And she would always be there and invite me to stuff. But and actually Raphael was friends with Synthetic Flying Machine, was really into them. And I have to say, like, honestly, I never saw Synthetic Flying Machine play. I was either whatever, just didn't go see them play. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, it's a huge regret, because I could have sped up my kind of like integration with
Uh-huh.
Will, Bill, and Jeff in a way if I'd done that. But they were around, and Will and Bill always used to say that I had a XTC cover band that I had
Uh-huh.
around like 1992, and we played like a brace. And when I first started hanging out with them, like 2 years later, they're like, "Man, we just moved to town and we saw your XTC thing. We fucking loved it." And we were just like, "God, that's fucking great."
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it took a little while before I started to hang out with them, but then eventually I did. And for a while, it was like, you know, before everybody kind of moved, like I didn't meet Jeff until later. So Jeff had been in town, but then had left and wandered around. Like he went to Seattle for a while, then he went to New York and whatever. But Will and Bill, I would see them, and I saw like their very earliest shows. I remember hanging out and talking to them. They played there was like kind of like so there's this vegetarian restaurant actually just closed, which is like a seismic event for Athens. This place called The Grit. It's like the
Mm-hmm.
first and like really long term like vegetarian restaurant in Athens. It's iconic.
Mm-hmm.
And So there was kind of like a block party where they closed off the street behind the restaurant and a bunch of bands
Mhm.
play. And Will and Bill just played by themselves. And that's when I first started like talking to them and hanging out. And they were like, can you play drums? Can you do this? We're looking to do this. And I started hanging out with them then. And then when Elf Power first started playing gigs, all of our with the Olivias. So, and then at that point, then I get eventually John Fernandez moved when he was like 18. He was just like the kid, you know, baby
Uh-huh.
face kid. And then they had this this girl named Kelly Noonan playing drums, and she had been on the scene for a while. She's like a real rocker. She had her own like all female rock bands and stuff like that. She was in a band called Wet, and she had some other stuff before that. And she had a recording studio. Spawn's first recording session was at Kelly's house studio, this place called Sweet 16. And so but all our early gigs in like 94 or so were with the Olivias. And I guess it was the California Demise 7-inch. And when I heard that too, I heard it on the radio late one night.
Mhm.
And I was just so blown away. I was just so blown away. And from that second that I heard California Demise, they were my gods, I think for everybody in our scene, we looked up to the Olivias so much, because they did it. They had somehow created this magic. It was undeniable magic on their 4-track, and it really showed you that it was possible to just make your record with a 4-track. Whereas we were doing 4-track stuff, and of course, like, yeah, we put out this 12-inch thing of Andrew's that he put out, and it was cool, and we were into it. But I think there was still kind of like that idea of like, oh well, eventually we'll go into a better studio and whatnot, because that's just like, you didn't think about it any. It's just what you did, right? But it's not to say that there wasn't other people that were kind of like blazing that trail, so to speak, on a like kind of a lo-fi thing. There were, but the Olivias definitely proved that it was possible to create something really, really fucking cool just on a 4-track. Yeah.
I
So
was
then
listening
we.
to the Of Montreal 4-tracks recordings this morning.
Oh yeah, yeah. So
All
like,
the Dustin Hoffman songs.
oh yeah. All those tracks. So let's see. So my timeline is that I played in Elf Power, and then in like 1994, maybe I guess it was 1995 or something like that. Andrew and Laura graduated from the University of Georgia, and Laura's brother lives in New York City, older brother, and he had like just bought like a brownstone that was like in a shitty neighborhood. Now it's like it's worth a shit. He's real smart. So anyway, he had this place, and they were like, at first they invited me to come up and said I could live at Steve's place, her brother's place. And then like a month before we were kind of go, Laura's like, oh, you can't live with us. And I was like, oh shit, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know anybody else in New York. I'll be fucking fucked. I was, had my own mental health struggles and stuff like that. So it's like probably not the best place for me to be. So I stuck around. But when I stuck around, what ended up happening is I started playing with the Olivias. So they needed somebody to play keyboard. So for about like 6 months, I played keys with the Olivias, and they did tell me about Pete Urchick. They said, well, there's this guy named moved down, and they'd play like a show with him in New York. They played CMJ. So I don't know if you know CMJ is College Music Journal, which is probably still around too, but it was like, instead of like Billboard chart, they play this thing called CMJ, which is College Music Journal, and it's like a kind of like an industry rag for college radio stations and stuff. And so they'd have their own charts and stuff like that. And so if you're like an indie band, your best you could hope for would be like to get some sort of attention would be like,
Uh-huh.
oh, if you're at least being played on college radio, you could wind up in this chart or whatever. So CMJ for years would have a like their own kind of like South by Southwest, but it was in New York City every year. And
Mhm.
so Will and Bill went up to play the CMJ, and so they recruited Eric Harris to play drums and Pete to play keys. It's all cross pollination thing, and like I go back to like Julian Coster because Julian is the one who really started to connect everybody together.
Mhm.
Julian is kind of like the forefather of the Elephant 16 in a way because he already had his own band Chocolate USA that he started in Tampa and toured and I don't know if you've seen the Elephant Six. Have you seen that? You probably haven't. Did you watch the Elephant Six documentary that just came out?
It just came out today, right?
It came out last night. Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
a lot of
okay.
people
I
were
have
watching
not.
it online. I, if you somehow you haven't watched it, but
I plan on
in the
watching it,
document,
but
well, it's required. You got to watch it.
okay.
Just
Okay.
like reading the Elephant Six book is required.
Okay.
Um, but in there, it does it touches on a little bit, but I mean, Julian had his own thing of like he got signed to this label called Bar None, who had put out They Might Be Giants, and, a label out of like Boca, New Jersey, which is basically right next to me. Uh, and that's why Of Montreal eventually got signed to Bar None, was kind of through
Mhm.
Julian as well. Um, uh, but yeah, Julian is the one who's kind of connecting everybody together.
Uh-huh.
So because I think Eric somehow had crossed paths with Julian. I mean, Jeremy Barnes from Nutrimilk Hotel, that was through Julian that Jeremy became a part of Nutrimilk. I mean, at first, Jeremy was going to play in music tapes. That's why he came to Athens, was really Andy Gonzalez from Marshmallow Coast. He was actually living in Denver, but had become friends with Julian and played in early version of music tapes, and that's why he came to Athens. Julian's kind of like the guy who gave everybody the confidence that you could do it,
Mhm.
and just really positive. Um, so anyway, I play with Olivia's, and then Laura and Andrew decided that New York wasn't working out for them. They kind of were breaking up. Like they went to New York in wintertime
Mhm.
and they kind of just struggled. And they were like, they wanted to do a tour to come back to Athens. So they talked to me and I went up to New York, practiced with them for a week. And then we did a tour as a 3-piece, played a couple of shows in New York and then came back down to Athens. And then we played like
Mhm.
2 shows in Athens that were like, we played like a house party at this place called the Landfill, which was
Uh-huh.
like kind of like, you might have heard. Will still lives in the landfill.
Uh-huh.
That
Um,
yeah, the house lives. His wife Kelly Roberto, U6 fan who
um,
moved
can,
down
can I
from
stop you
Buffalo.
for a second?
Yeah.
So I'm using like the free version of Zoom, so it's only like a minute to like 40 minutes to call. So I have to
Oh
stop
sure.
this one and start a new one.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna stop it right now, and let's just pick up like right back where we left off.
Are you gonna send me a new link or what?
Yeah, I think I will.
Okay. Okay. I'll see you in a bit.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right.